Behold, surprise podcast, lightning round Q&A question for SenpaiSonico, who asked during December 2017 what I thought about Damage 2.5. They have scrapped those Damage 2.5 changes, so I'm not going to talk about them specifically, but a lot of the things I wrote in the script that I wrote to answer this question were mostly relating to how to deal with these kinds of changes in general, so I am still going to read them to you, and I hope you all find it interesting. Rapid fire takeaways, let's go. The most important thing I can say is that every time changes like this happen, they're iterated. They change them. They may not be iterated enough. Who can say if the end result will be good, but you can be basically positive that our final changes will not be the ones we read about before or the new ones we read about eventually in the future. There are obvious glaring flaws in the changes described in that first post, so there's no good reason to worry about them then or now yet. We'll get into that later. The first thing I thought when I read that post was that it was rough. A single proofreading pass would have exposed half a dozen clear flaws even to someone who didn't even play Warframe. So if we were still given that material, it must have been subject to significant change, and lo and behold, it was. It got cancelled. Furthermore, we don't know what's happening to elemental damage types. Anything that blows up the game's balance on the physical damage side might be fixed by the elemental changes, or it might be made that much worse. We always use damage types in tandem, we use them together, so there really might be an elemental status that fixes or ultimately buffs a certain weakened physical status. We already have that in Viral's status effect alongside slash statuses. And then slash statuses. Some of the proposed slash changes would almost completely break Hunter Munitions and Forced Procs on stance mods. Lots of people picked up on that. But there are plenty of cases where this game's mechanics work differently based on context. Consider effects that reduce armor, of which there are at least 4 different types. If they change how corrosive procs work, more on that later as well, you would be wrong to assume that they're also changing how Shattering Impact works, for example. So it's fairly likely that our devs will notice the obvious need to split how slash damage is calculated in some way to validate their stance mod system and Hunter Munitions, although, ironically, that would make weapons that lack slash damage better at inflicting strong slash status procs. Anyway, that covers the biggest things I have to say about Damage 2.5 as we saw it so far. Now, let's do some educated guessing and look at the future under Damage 2.5, which will almost certainly be negative, so let's talk about that. Some procs could be a downside, and lots more will be useless. You'll want to avoid status, to avoid getting an impact proc that will hurl your enemy away from you and make them harder to kill, as per the originally proposed changes that have indeed been scrapped since. But you'll always want status to get corrosive or whatever unless they change how armor works to make enemies easier to kill. So this would be madness. You would want to avoid status for some procs that would make things harder and get it for some that would make things easier. It would be terrible. There wouldn't be very many good ways to counter that, but since it would undoubtedly shake up the meta, such changes might stick. I can especially imagine that happening if they split how status is calculated, as I talked about earlier, because lots of players will feel like it's a compromise if the changes are iterated a bunch and then they're like, fine, we'll split how slash works. But that wouldn't be a compromise. Those changes literally downgrade the system we already had and nobody gains anything. Even the most cynical of you will agree, and it doesn't even gain Digital Extremes any money, because it'll be such a terrible nerf to so many weapons. Yes, players might seek out other weapons after everything they have is nerfed to smithereens, but so few weapons will be good that they're more likely to just quit the game. I've even talked to veterans and Warframe partners before this change was scrapped who planned to take a break from the game no matter what was decided because those changes threatened to be so rough when we first got them that it will make it almost impossible to play or make informed content. Better changes are readily available, and it would be even easier to just do nothing at all and not make things worse. So worst case scenario is that we basically get exactly the changes we heard about before and more like them for elemental damage types. Not every status needs the stack to be good. Slash is good because it bypasses armor. I want to be respectful throughout this video because I think our devs will eventually figure out a good solution, and I'm happy that they're listening to us, at least, but I refuse to hold back on this one issue. Whoever wrote that initial post needs to play the game, literally for one mission. Nobody who has ever played Warframe for a significant amount of time would ever suggest those changes unless they just didn't understand how the game worked. And everyone I've spoken to who likes any or all of those changes in their current form was either a very new player, horribly misinformed, or optimistic. So speaking of optimistic, let's talk about what could possibly get better from doing all of this. Why do we even have damage 2.5 as a concept? Why are we even talking about damage changes? Well, it's because some of them do suck. Puncture and magnetic are terrible. In every situation, they are irrelevant and bad, and you never, ever, ever want them. Puncture at least has good damage type bonuses. It is at least good against normal Grineer armor. So that's good. I mean, that is pretty good. So like when a weapon has puncture damage, if it doesn't have like crazy status, you're like, okay, that's fine, I guess. But magnetic is just bad. Its damage bonuses are bad. You don't need damage bonuses against shields because you can just ignore them with toxin or viral. So you really just gas. Oh, there's so many. Anyway, so the payoff of damage 2.5 potentially would be that we would get changes to puncture and magnetic. I personally do not have a good solution for puncture. I don't think it's a good solution to have it pierce a percentage of enemy armor. It did used to do that quite a ways back, years back. But I don't think that's a good solution in the current state of the game, and it's got a lot of overlap with slash and corrosive. It's an inelegant design. I do think magnetic has a pretty simple solution. I think magnetic could very easily just be changed to be when you get a magnetic proc on an enemy, they sort of gravitate all nearby enemies together, like passively, softly. So it doesn't crowd control in an area like hard crowd control the way Blast does, but it groups enemies together. So it will affect enemies in an area the way Gas and Blast do, but it won't actually like make them stop attacking. It will just group them up. This would be good for a variety of reasons. First of all, the other elements are already good, so if we don't change them, we know that we're already mostly not going to build magnetic. So whatever magnetic becomes, for it to not like destroy the game balance that has been delicately built up, we want it to be something relatively niche. We want it to be something we don't want all the time. So this would be something we wouldn't want all the time. You only want magnetic when you want to group enemies together for some reason. Like when you have gas procs, because gas procs are better when enemies are grouped up. They'll hit more nearby enemies when you get a proc on one, and if you hit many, then the procs will hit each other. And that would be awesome because when you put all four elements on a weapon, you can pick Blast and Corrosive, or Radiation and Viral, or Gas and Magnetic, which means that those two procs would synergize a little bit. Then it would make Blast and Corrosive like the softening, like I'll kill you later proc, where you knock them down and weaken their armor. Radiation Viral would be like the offensive support proc set, where you reduce their health and make them attack each other. And those two sets already have plenty of applications. You used Blast and or Corrosive plenty of the time. You use Radiation and or Viral plenty of the time. But now Gas and Magnetic would also have an application together. When you run both of them, that would be like the kill a crowd proc set. And that would be a really elegant, easy solution. They already have the coding in the game. They just need to use Mag's magnetized coding and have that be without the bubble, and the enemies just move together a little bit. And if you get multiple magnetic procs, they want to make everything stack. Screw you, but fine. Just make it so the gravity is stronger, the more, and a bigger area or whatever. Easy change. Easy money. Easy money. I don't know what to do about puncture, I admit. I don't think that it can be anything to do with reducing damage, because impact reduces all damage that enemies deal. If you are ragdolled or stunned or juggled or whatever, you don't do any damage. So puncture reducing some damage is just always going to be bad. But it really shouldn't be that hard for them to come up with one basic thing that the other statuses haven't done. For goodness sakes, it could even just be like your bullet creates a small shrapnel blast around it. Like it punctures the enemy's armor and fragments it, and it just goes everywhere and damages nearby enemies for a percentage of the damage you dealt with the puncture. Like, for goodness sakes, it's like a gas proc, but it doesn't have a damage over time effect. We already have plenty of things that are riffs on other procs. What would be wrong with that? And yes, like, it would need tuning, forget about the numbers. That would be an easy solution, and it would make it a viable, reasonable proc, and then the job is done. We don't need to make any more changes, it's done! Isn't that great? We just did damage 2.5! Man, I really wish that we would just get changes like that. Anyway, that's what I have to say about damage 2.5. SenpaiSonico, I hope this was an interesting answer. I hope it wasn't too in-depth. I hope it didn't lack depth. Let me know if you have anything else you're thinking about it. I would love to still hear discussion about this. Just keep in mind that they are going to iterate it. Whatever they say next for like what the next changes will be, they're going to iterate that too. So we're not going to, the next time they say something, don't freak out. Like, just leave it alone. We know they're going to change it. If we complain, they're going to get rid of it. DE is a very populist developer, so we really don't have to worry about it too much. But we do have to know why what happened was bad, and know when they propose something, it might be good. Just having something that maintains the status quo is not necessarily good, but having something that changes it just for the sake of it is also not good. And the worst thing possible is if we get more changes like the ones we got before that display a clear lack of any understanding about the game's mechanics at all. Seriously, if there's anything you can take away from this, I don't even understand how it's possible that those changes got written down. Like, who even wrote that? Like, how is it even possible for someone who plays the game to write those? Anyway, I literally do not understand, but let's just hope that it's no one important, and then we can move on with our lives. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed my little podcast on Damage 2.5. Let me know what you think wherever you like, and I will see you all next time.